Hi, welcome to class today. I'm Elaine Engelhardt from Utah Valley State, and we're in our Ethics and Values class in the section on business ethics. Today we're going to be looking at the philosopher Milton Friedman, and I should really call him an economist. And I have a guest here today, Dr. Brent Eager. Thanks for being with us today, Brent.
Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Let me introduce you to the students who are here with us. Over here we have Rhonda and Luke, and on this side we have Lloyd and Aaron. And thank you for joining us. Brent, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
Well, I am an academician at this point in my career. I taught for a number of years at BYU and then went into business for a period of about 15 years. And then have emerged back here at UVSC on the faculty in the School of Business. And I'm delighted to be involved here. It's great. And I love being able to teach in this area of business and ethics together.
Yes, Brent and I teach the business ethics class, and I hope that someday I'll have some of you students, that we will have some of you students in our class so that we can look at some of these very important issues with Brent and myself. And it's nice to have Brent's practical business background as well as understanding the economic theory and the philosophical theory. So
thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. And today we're going to be looking at Milton Friedman. And Friedman comes to us then from we call it the Chicago School, from the University of Chicago, where he taught for 35 years and received a Nobel Prize for his work in economics. And then you want to tell us a little bit more about Friedman and where he went from there?
Well, I think he's really interesting in that he, I think, has emerged as a figure that people like to admire his views, and yet there are those that violently disagree with what Friedman has to say, so he's very important. But he is recognized as a great mind and spent time at Stanford University and the Hoover Institution there, and he's very highly respected, even though people may disagree with him or agree with him.
I think that to be a well-educated person in business ethics, one needs to at least understand Friedman. Yes. Whether they agree with him or not, that they need to understand his argument. And so we'll go through his argument and talk about the strong points and those that maybe aren't so strong. Anything else that you'd like to add?
I don't think so. Let's
swing
into action.
Let me see if the students have any questions or comments before we get started. Anything from any of you today on Friedman? Well, then we'll pull up the first graphic and have Luke read that for us, please.
Okay. The businessmen believe that they are defending free enterprise when they declaim that business is not concerned merely with profit, but also with promoting desirable social ends. That business has a social conscience and takes seriously its responsibilities for providing employment, eliminating discrimination, avoiding pollution, and whatever else may be the catchwords of the contemporary crop of reformers.
Okay, thank you, Luke, for reading that for us. Now, in this then, Friedman is going to make the very strong argument that the important part of business is to make money, that the only social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that message from Friedman and how this quote fits into it, Brent?
Well, it seems to me that what people latch onto is the idea that the only reason for business is to be making profits. And I think that Friedman may be misinterpreted in this particular way. And so that's what people seem to notice so much about what he had to say.
But he also doesn't want a business to be wasteful either. He wants them to be very concerned that they have an obligation to their stockholders then.
That's right. That's correct.
Okay. Any comments from the students on this? Lloyd, any notions on Friedman regarding then the social responsibility of a business?
Well, yeah, well, in that quote, he continued, I don't know if we finished it or not, but he
well,
basically
let's
goes
go
on.
ahead and pull
Should
up the quote and you can finish it. Thanks.
Yeah, it says, continuing on with the last, what he was saying, he says, in fact, they are, or would be, if they or anyone else took them seriously, preaching pure and unadulterated socialism. Businessmen who talk this way are unwitting puppets of the intellectual forces that have been undermining the basis of a free society these past decades.
Okay, so Lloyd, let's put the whole context, the whole quote in context then. Tell me just a little bit what he's saying.
Well, he's saying that if a business is pushing towards social aspects, whether helping out poor people or the environment or anything like that, that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing as a business, and that they're being controlled by other people these, what he calls it, intellectual forces, and these others who want to tell them how they should run their business, and they're not freely doing the business for themselves.
Okay. Aaron, can you tell me what social responsibility means and why some people use the term social responsibility as another term for business ethics?
I think what they're trying to get at when they equate the two is that the idea that businesses have an element to not harm, to not do practices that would create problems for society as a whole. And I think that, I don't know, I have a hard time with Milton Friedman on the surface, because he's coming right out and saying that the business should either ignore or push to the side the concept of being aware of what that business is involved in outside of just the making the money.
Okay, and we'll need to explore that just a little bit more. And let me ask Rhonda, when you were living in Michigan, Rhonda, were there things that the businesses did for the community? Were there museums or donations to libraries? Can you remember any of these?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I lived in Flint, Michigan growing up. That being one of the big motor cities. Also, AC, I don't know if everybody would remember what a spark plug is.
Oh, yes.
Well, Flint was one of the major developers of the AC spark plug. And it was through, I believe, that particular company that there were after-school activities that were provided for children for a very nominal fee. There was the Mott Foundation that was a tremendous employer of education, educational pursuits and people, and yet they also went into the schools and had a diverse number of things that were available for kids, things that I participated in.
Sure. So we have then these might be also what we'd call social responsibilities. Another fun social responsibility, by bringing up that spark plug that was made in Flint, the technology from that went over to the space shuttle, and and the tiles that are on the space shuttle then come from that technology of the spark plugs. So we see, numerous ways where we can have social responsibility going on. And Lloyd had his hand up as well.
I was going to make a comment. This was written in 1970, which was
Good to
right in the
put this
middle
in
of the Cold War.
context.
And in a lot of sense, well, I don't think Milton Friedman would necessarily try to make this connection. A lot of people are making the connection between socialism and communism. And a lot of people are claiming that socialism was just communism in disguise. And so a lot of ways, I think Milton Friedman is using the term socialism as a kind of a scare word, a word that people at that time were really scared of, and people who claim to be socialists, others claim that they're communists and trying to bring, communist Russia hiddenly into the U.S. and whatnot. So I think that term socialism is a rhetorical effect that Friedman's using to try to scare people as well.
All right, thank you. And let me have Luke just advance this point a little bit more. So how would you see the use of the word socialism in here? Would you interpret it, it is definitely used as a scare word, but Luke, how are you going to also see the warning that he's giving here?
I would agree with Lloyd. He seems to be, when I read it, it seems as if he's playing the communist card. Specifically, he says that anybody who does this is quote, an unwitting puppet of the intellectual forces that have been undermining the basis of a free society these past decades, which would seem very clearly to be hinting at communism.
Okay, thanks. So Brent, help us out with this a little bit. Where is Milton Friedman moving with this?
Well, I agree with what both Lloyd and Luke have said here, because he does seem to be, I think in a sense, almost in retrospect, he's holding up a straw man here and inviting us to take a shot at it and see if we can argue against this. But this idea that socialism is that's scary to businessmen. Business people get very nervous when they're accused of being either wittingly or unwittingly a socialist
Sure.
or communist, of course.
Sure. And we kind of get two arguments wrapped into one then. So, and one argument is that business must be in business to make a profit, and the other one is that maybe if you're involved in some social concern to make your business better or less harmful to the public, that this could also be seen as socialism. One of the things that has had to happen since the days of Karl Marx, who we talked about in our last class period, has been government intervention in business, something that Milton Friedman would not like at all. I think that he would go along with the invisible hand and hope that businesses could be moral in and of themselves and make their own moral decisions. But when we see business hurting people, then we end up having the government come in and set up some organizations. Could you students tell me some organizations that maybe the government has had to set up so that folks weren't hurt? How about it, Erin? You have something?
Like maybe the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration.
Okay, and why did we need that?
Well, they needed to test to make sure that people aren't putting A, harmful products into foods or consumptive materials, and B, to make sure that what they are saying they're putting in there is actually what's there. And just regulating, particularly like in the drug industry, regulating those substances which are well, legal and illegal, and where they come in from, and that kind of thing.
Good example. And Brent, on Erin's example then, we hear complaints from those businesses, from those industries. They'd rather not have these.
Oh, that's right. I mean, there's, it sort of hits the bottom line. It's interesting, some of the examples, though, that come out are egregious. The Nestle company that was selling overseas, selling what was ersatz baby food, it wasn't good, didn't have nourishing value to it, and
Yes.
of course this was very bad publicity for them.
Oh, and we just find it time after time, don't we? And so, once again, we have an FDA who comes in and says, we're going to help the consumers with their food.
Yeah.
Otherwise, maybe these businesses will get carried away with profit. How about you, Lloyd? Can you think of an area?
There's tons of them. The first one that came to my head was OSHA, which sets up standards, safety standards for companies. I used to work construction and painting and whatnot, and there's always all these rules of how hot, what we could do on a ladder, and other places I work, what we could do with everything, with lifts and everything. There's certain standards of safety that a lot of times we felt like we had to do work a lot slower, a lot more inefficiently because we had to live up to these standards.
But at that time, you were 16, 17, 18, and you were thinking about working faster. Now what do you think about those safety standards being imposed on you?
Sometimes I agree with a lot of them. Sometimes I feel like, okay, well, we could have gone away, but I'm here today, so I guess they're served a certain purpose.
So a lot of times those OSHA standards do protect, I'd say, the younger workers or those who are in a much more intensive labor job, and maybe this ladder is way too high. Maybe someone didn't think about what having this kind of dust or something in this area would do to the lungs, precautions for working with insulation. How about it, Brent? Why do we have OSHA, and is it an important arm?
Well, I think it is important, and I have a tendency myself to react negatively when new regulations are proposed, because this freedom thing that we have, we don't want to have our agency impaired by the government coming in and imposing standards on us. I think that's an emotional initial reaction, but in retrospect, as they work through, there may be flaws in the way things are managed or whatever, and the decisions made. Some of them may seem silly. I think Lloyd probably experienced some of these requirements that just didn't make a lot of sense at the time, but maybe in retrospect they do. But on balance, it's important, and that these things happen.
Okay, thanks. And how about you, Rhonda?
I think balance is absolutely an important aspect. I think sometimes too much government is in our lives.
And I think that's what Friedman says.
Yeah, and although I believe that, for instance, Americans with Disabilities Act, so many people who are not able to get into buildings or to use the restroom unless there was some sort of government involvement. And so in that respect, I agree with those things.
Okay, another good act. And Luke, how about you?
Like Lloyd said, there are quite a few. I would think the Environmental Protection Agency is an important one. It deals with business on a number of levels, banning certain pesticides, creating regulations about where you can and cannot construct certain things. It definitely has a huge impact on.
Doesn't allow wastes into the water, into the air, that had notoriously been going into the water and the air and harming communities while the business was making a profit.
Yes.
And so at some point the government had to say, we really wish that you could regulate this yourselves, but since you won't, then we'll do that. And so once again, two more provocative acts. And you hear lots of grumbling about the Americans with Disabilities Act, and you hear lots of grumblings about the EPA, don't you, Brent?
Yes, yes. It's interesting to me, and I haven't studied this a lot, but I've seen enough excerpts in magazines like National Geographic that shows the degree of pollution in other countries. It's just horrible.
Manila,
Yeah.
Mexico City.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
And we're actually very glad now
That's
that
correct.
we're watching, at least businesses watching. Now it's really up to the individuals to say we're going to carpool more. We're going to watch our very own individual wastes and try to cut back on these pollutants. So it's not just businesses that have these social responsibilities. We certainly have them too. But we're going to get back to talking about money. And let's look at the next slide. And would you read this for us, Rhonda?
Only people can have responsibilities. A corporation is an artificial person, and in this sense may have artificial responsibilities. But businesses as a whole cannot be said to have responsibilities, even in this vague sense.
What do you think about that comment then, Lloyd? Do you think that's correct?
I guess a lot of it depends on how you want to define a person, because you want to say it's an artificial person and whatnot. And it raises the question of what role does a business play in society? You know, is a business itself a member of society, or is it just something that members of society get together and create? So.
Erin?
I would say the thing that I find interesting is how he's arguing that while people have responsibilities, and that he leaves it there and doesn't maybe pursue the argument of the idea that corporations are made up of people and business is made up of people within the social setting. And couldn't we say that they have responsibilities as well?
And I think both of these are very good points. Brent, how would you respond to them then?
Well, it's interesting to me that on one occasion, an actual corporation was put on trial. Of course, the corporation couldn't appear there, but and convicted. And this may have been appealed, but the idea, it's hard to work with.
You know, I think I know what you're talking about too, Brent. And I think it's so important that the corporation, not just the corporation get a fine, but they reach in behind and get the president and the vice president and some of those who made those decisions, and also convict them. I think with the Exxon Valdez, that the president and CEO of Exxon actually had to get his own attorney, as did Captain Hazelwood, and Exxon had their own attorneys, and they were basically going to say the fault is with the president and the captain and not us, and leave us harmless. So we even see those distinctions coming with these artificial persons.
I think these distinctions highlight the fact that these are artificial creations, but created for what is perceived by the legislators, those who enacted these kinds of things, for a social good in the long run, for society as a whole. We would benefit by having this artificial corporation, or artificial person or corporation. So there's a sort of a good that's desired there, but it gets lost sometimes in the activities of the executives. And
it does. In fact, a famous book by kind of an infamous author is called On a Clear Day You Can See General Motors, and it was written by John DeLorean, who made the DeLorean automobile and then decided to sell drugs to help support the car industry so that it could be a success. So he made a big mistake. But he had been an executive with General Motors, and he said, we were doing some bad things at General Motors. And he said, in fact, we were making a car, the Corvair, and we knew that it was not a high-performance sports car, as the marketers were saying, but we knew that it was going to roll at 40 miles an hour, and all we had to do was put a simple bar on it to stop it from rolling. And he said, we kind of got into this groupthink, you know, this artificial person that's the corporation, and decided, let's look at the bottom line, let's do kind of a cost-benefit analysis, let's not do anything about it. And they, in fact, didn't do anything about it until their own children started getting killed in the Corvair. So any other thoughts about the artificial person or the Corvair, and even how one of your favorite politicians made his career starting with the Corvair, Luke?
I think this idea is very interesting because we see this, you know, the idea that he says a corporation is an artificial individual, therefore it only has artificial responsibilities, which is an idea based on a Supreme Court case from the turn of the last century. But his argument, you know, as Brent was saying, the idea that we allow these artificial entities to exist is based on the idea that it's contributing to the social good, and therefore it has a certain responsibility, just like with the corporations that own the news channels and so forth. They use the airwaves for free, and many would argue that therefore they have a responsibility to provide information on what's going on, provide news, provide you know, information about candidates and so forth who are running for office. And you know, in that same sense, the fact that it's an artificial organization that we allow to exist means that it should have greater responsibilities, not lesser.
All right, thank you. And the favorite politician, of course, is Ralph Nader.
That's right.
Who said, you know, there has to be more to social responsibility. There has to be more to business than making profits. You've got to make a safe product. So thank you for your comments. They've been very good. Anything you'd like to add to this,
I don't
Brent?
think so. That's fine.
Okay, then we'll move on to the next point. And would you read this for us, Rhonda?
In a free enterprise, private property system, a corporate executive is an employee of the owners of the business. He has direct responsibility to his employers. That responsibility is to conduct the business in accordance with their desires, which generally will be to make as much money as possible while conforming to the basic rules of the society, both those embodied in law and those embodied in ethical custom.
Okay, so Rhonda, we have a very important statement that he's made right here, where he says they need to conform to the basic rules of society, in law, and in ethics. So he's making a strong statement here saying, you need to make a lot of money, but you need to stay within the bounds of the law and ethical custom. You want to tell us a little bit about this?
Well, you know, and I think this is where I get a bit conflicted. Because on one hand, there has to be an embodiment of law, ethics, how you make money, how you distribute whatever it is that you make. On the other hand, my conflict is with, you know, those who have invested in that company deserve, you know, the principals of that company deserve to have their profit. And so there's that conflict for me.
Okay, all right. But no conflict with Friedman saying, I don't want you to leave behind the law and ethics. Keep those in mind.
Well, actually, this is one part where I find Friedman more accessible, because even Friedman says we shouldn't have an Enron.
Yeah.
Even Friedman says you can't steal people's pensions for the sake of making the profit for your shareholders. There has to be that ethical custom, the idea that, you know, and the law say you can't steal from people just outright in their investing and doctor your books and your numbers and all this kind of thing. So he is reserving some discretion. I just think that part is more accessible.
I think so too. Brent, some thoughts on that?
I think that's excellent. This phrase really kind of opens the door. The phrase "rules of the game."
Yes.
That enables us to make Friedman more accessible, because his view of what the rules of the game are may have been narrower when he wrote this 35 years ago than perhaps now. He might, although I can't speak for him obviously, but what are the rules of the game and how are they determined? What does our society make the rules of the game for business? And I think that's can be construed broader nowadays than it may have been in the past.
Okay. What would you think about that, Lloyd?
I do, like I said, we have to deal with this text here, and it's hard to say what his ideas might be today. But I think what Aaron said is a good point, and what he's saying here is there is this responsibility, and that's as a business owner, as a CEO, as anything, your direct responsibility. That's what he says. Direct responsibility is to your employers, you're the people you're hired, because you've made a contractual agreement with them to offer them certain things, and so because of that, not just legally, but it's as a part of your business, he's saying that's your ethical duty to live up to those agreements you've made with people.
Okay, thank you. And I'm glad you came back to that first part of the quote as well, saying where he says, as a corporate executive, you are an employee of the corporation. You're an employee of the stockholders. You're an employee of the board of directors, and you're going to need to conform with what they say. But then again, you stay within the rules, the laws, and the ethical customs. So. Any other comments on this? We'll move on then to the next quote. And would you read this one for us, Luke?
Of course, the corporate executive is also a person in his own right. If he gives to charity, he is spending his own money or time or energy, not the money or the time or energy he is contracted to devote to their purposes. If these are social responsibilities, they're the social responsibilities of individuals, not of business.
Thank you. So, Rhonda, let me take you back to these Michigan areas where you were able to have fun as a kid, and that some of the corporations had donated these. What do you think Friedman might be saying about them? It would probably be that he'd be hopeful that individuals.
Well, and that's an important part of the more, the greater the wealth, the better it is for an individual person to take that wealth, whether it's Oprah or, Dr. Phil, and all these different I don't know, what do they call those, the associations that they make that benefit other people?
Foundations.
Foundations. And that happened to me, as a child, that there were so many very wealthy organizations that, in turn, they were wealthy individuals that gave to the community so that they could improve. Each child was it wasn't even just children, it was adults as well.
Okay. And so he's in favor then of saying, you wealthy individuals, you can give to the community. But he's also going to remind the corporations, make sure that you're not taking away from the bottom line. So maybe you're going to do a foundation, but make sure if you do a foundation that you're not taking anything away from profits or research funding or other things like that.
Well,
Aaron.
I think what's interesting is he doesn't account for the idea that a lot of corporations, I think, just to be really cynical, go into nonprofit things or go into foundations and those kinds of things. There are tax breaks. It does something for the reputation of the business. To endow a scholarship, to have a community field day where they clean up the community that they're in, or one of these things. For every time they don't give their employees health care, they go out and do a community service project instead. And like I said, that's the ultra cynical view, but Friedman doesn't seem to be accounting for that. What he's talking about, it seems to me, is only if the business were to just say skim it off the top and say they're going to donate to something. He's not accounting for the fact that often businesses seem to do this because it benefits them.
Sure. Sure. My daughter's in public relations, and this is her job, and part of it is taking care of the foundation work that the business supports, and it's a very important part of the face that they'd like to give the community about this business. And there's absolutely a budget set aside, and that's how it's done. It's set aside through this budget, not skimmed off the top. Lloyd?
It actually does bring a little bit of that up and talk what you just said about how a business has every right to, if they feel like it's going to be good for the business, you know, to make a public image of being caring about the environment. You know, and you see ads all the time on TV like, oh, we care about the environment because it's ideal. And he's saying, look, that's fine if you're doing it, if you're thinking about profits. If you're thinking, okay, well, they care about the environment, I'm going to shop with them, or I'm going to buy their cars or something, then it's that time that it's okay to, in a sense, pretend to care about the environment.
Did you ever think you'd see smoking companies saying, we care about your health?
That about Philip Morris commercials just done.
Yeah, yes. And Luke, you had a point too.
I was going to make basically the same point that Friedman just says, so long as you're doing it for profit, you can, you know, do whatever you want that may appear to be social responsibility. And if you want to call it social responsibility in the interest of making profit, that's fine with me if you're that hypocritical. And he really does use the word hypocritical.
Well, I'll let you find the word, and I'll just ask Brent if he has any further thoughts on this, because the language gets a little stronger in our next couple of graphics.
I think it would be very interesting to be a fly on the wall at perhaps some of the boardroom discussions, the executive discussion, when they make decisions on what do we do with our money. But I have been impressed by what some wealthy individuals have done sort of close to home. I taught at Westminster College for 10 years, and they have been heavily endowed by the Gore family, the makers of Gore-Tex, and but that money came from the individuals, not the company.
Not the company.
And I really appreciated and admired. They are really well-intentioned people, and I appreciate what they've done.
What they were able to do. It's amazing what philanthropy does do.
Yes.
And let's pull up this next graphic and have Aaron read it for us. And he's going to get a little stronger about this too. Aaron, do you want to read this?
Sure. In each of these cases, the corporate executive would be spending someone else's money for a general social interest. But if he does this, he is in effect imposing taxes on one hand and deciding how the tax proceeds shall be spent on the other.
And this is a continuation. Would you go on, please?
Here, the businessman, self-elected or appointed directly or indirectly by the stockholders, is to be simultaneously legislator, executive, and jurist. He is to decide whom to tax, by how much, and for what purpose, and he is to spend the proceeds. All this guided only by general exhortations from on high to restrain inflation, improve the environment, fight poverty, and so on and on.
Okay, so he's pretty adamant about this. He says, you're fine if you spend your own money, but he said, I'm going to accuse you of what the Americans accused the British of before the Revolutionary War, you know, taxation without representation. You cannot take money away from the corporation. You can't take money away from the stockholders. And Brent, why is he so strong about this taxation without representation?
Well, as I see it, probably it goes back to something very deep-rooted that most Americans feel, that there's been a separation of the powers between the executive and the judicial and so on, and because there's danger of too much power there if they're all combined in one entity. And I think he's saying, hey, listen, the business could have too much power here, and of course in other places critics have said they couldn't make decisions anyway about what is necessarily good in spending their monies. But I think it's sort of a deep-rooted sort of a thing.
Okay, and do you want to tell us a little bit more about it, Lloyd? He's saying, you know, I don't want you spending it on the environment. I don't want you picking up these favorite pet projects. This isn't good. You're going to take away from our bottom line.
Well, there's a dual attack he's kind of making here. One on the social aspect of business, but also he's really going up against the very fear, or he's going with that fear of socialism, communism that was going on at that time, because I can't find the exact text, but he talks about how businessmen, for the most part, they don't know how to to deal with inflation. They don't know how to deal with the environment. They're businessmen. They don't study these things. And so what they're having to do, if they're going and trying to make social change, they're taking on someone else's words. And so they're letting the government control them. And that's in a lot of sense, that's what really he's pointing at. He's not saying, look, he's not really attacking business, he's really attacking the government.
Very astute
saying
point.
that the government's controlling the businesses in these aspects.
Right, so he's coming back also and saying, well, I don't want you working on pollution, and the government shouldn't be messing into business either. Good point. And then you said you had another point? Or was that it?
That was it, yeah.
Okay. All right. And Rhonda, Luke, some other thoughts on this?
I think it's interesting that he returns over and over again to the idea of the executive, his job is to think about the stockholders that he represents. And I think the thing that I find interesting is if you change that from stockholders to stakeholders, it changes everything. Because who has a stake in the corporation is different from who has money invested in the corporation. If you take that idea, then the community that it's based in may have a stake. All sorts of people and the environment and all sorts of factors may be considered stakeholders in the corporation and change his analysis a little bit.
Thank you. So we have the theory brought to us then by Ed Friedman. It's interesting that we've got these two names sounding so close, but Ed Friedman from the University of Virginia, who comes up with this stakeholder theory, saying, let's look at this as stakeholders, which is much more broad than the stockholders. But that's not Friedman's point.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you brought that up. Friedman's point is going to come right back to saying this very strong, stay away from anything that looks like taxation without representation, that you're taking money away from the profits of the corporation. Any other thoughts on that?
I like the appeal of what Luke just said about
good guy, isn't he?
Yes, about Freeman's stakeholder idea, which is still in the process of being embellished and developed.
Yes, one day Luke would like to be a politician. I mean, really. He'd like to be a senator or something here in the state. And we'll have to see how that all works out.
Yes.
But you'd have to walk a very delicate line with this because you're worrying about government intervention in business, and that's always a big concern. And you're also worried about we the people and how businesses are making profit off of products or other side effects of products that could be harming people, harming the environment, and doing other damages.
Yes.
So it leaves us in a sticky position. Any other thoughts on this? So Aaron says no, so I'll just get you to read the next graphic, Aaron.
All right. This is the basic reason why the doctrine of social responsibility involves the acceptance of the socialist view that political mechanisms, not market mechanisms, are the appropriate way to determine the allocation of scarce resources to alternative uses.
Okay, so why would he call this socialism, and tell me a little bit about your response to this?
I think he would say that the doctrine of social responsibility necessarily accepts socialist because he wants to equate social responsibility with this kind of taxation without representation, which then he's equating with what's yours is mine, what's mine is yours, and it's all a collective. And he wants to equate then by way of those things that social responsibility is socialism.
Okay, and go ahead and give me your response.
And I think that while it's an interesting argument to make, but I also think that it seems to me that he wants to give the market mechanism preferential treatment, that I think he is forgetting things like the story of London, England, where there were, during the industrial age, there are moths that completely die out because of pollution. This white moth suddenly dies out because it stands out against gray smog, and it tweaks the environment and these kinds of strange things. I think he's treating that that market mechanism in a preferential way.
Okay, and so we're looking at this market mechanism and talking also about public relations just a little bit earlier and saying, now this would be an acceptable area. And Luke, were you able to find the quote in the book that tells us that this is going to be okay?
Yes.
Okay, tell us where to read this then.
Well, it's fairly lengthy, but
Well, we'll have you read it. That's just fine.
probably the most important part is the last paragraph on page 319, second column.
Okay.
It would be inconsistent of me to call on corporate executives to refrain from this hypocritical window dressing, which is the idea of doing these socially responsible things for the sake of profit.
Mm-hmm.
This hypocritical window dressing because it harms the foundations of a free society. That would be to call on them to exercise a social responsibility. If our institutions and the attitudes of the public make it in their self-interest to cloak their actions in this way, I cannot summon much indignation to denounce them.
Okay, tell us a little bit about what that means then and how that fits in with having a good marketing campaign, having a good public relations campaign, putting a good face on the corporate image.
Yeah, he's saying, I think he's expressing that a little bit of disgust at the fact that corporations do this, but at the same time saying, look, I'm making this case that you should be doing whatever maximizes your profit. And if this maximizes your profit, I can't really tell you not to do it.
Okay, so as long as it's not going to harm the profit, then go for it.
Yeah.
Okay. And he's not sure if it's a good business plan, but other corporations are going to say it's very important for us to have this as part of our marketing plan, as part of our corporate plan. Do you want to tell us about any of your experiences in business with this, Brent?
Well, I'm intrigued by this idea of his using the language of market mechanisms, because that's kind of bedrock thinking, beginning really with Adam Smith, the invisible hand, and so on. And there seems to be the socialism view that individuals can make decisions better than this invisible, unknown, that we cannot know market mechanism. But yet, if you stop and look at it, we have great prosperity as a consequence that the market has generated, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And we can always come back to this notion that he'll say, given whether or not you decide to do public relations, marketing campaigns, he's not going to be opposed to you giving to charity. That's going to be just fine individually.
Yes.
But he's going to
true.
say, you're going to mess up the market mechanisms if you give to charity or have social responsibility, so to speak, as a corporation. You're going to take away from our bottom line. Any further thoughts on that, Lloyd?
I'll say something. It seems like Friedman's got this underlying belief that if businesses were really damaging the environment and people knew about it, then people would stop supporting them. Or if they were really hurting their workers, then people would stop working for them, and that it'd take care of itself. But a lot of this kind of assumes that the public knows about these things. And when a business isn't forced to do some of these things, a lot of times it'll do even the opposite, and it'll set out a marketing campaign to make it look like they're safer, to make it look like that these things aren't the case, and so that self-fixing that I think Friedman kind of implies will occur doesn't happen.
I think that's a very good point.
Well, I think it
Rhonda?
also assumes that if people know about the things that are wrong or not going well in a company, that they would stand up and decide either not to work for it or to do something about it to correct it, and that's not true either.
Rhonda, that's an excellent point. I like your point too, Lloyd. And maybe you can, well, I'll take you as a Michigander back to Michigan again, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the Ford Pinto and how that relates also to your comment.
Well, the Ford Pinto, I had one.
And you're here.
And I'm here. And that actually is the issue. The Ford Pinto was designed in such a way that if you were to have someone clobber you from the rear, there was a good chance that car would explode.
Okay, right into flames.
And the makers of the Pinto, it was kind of one of those, well, how many people might it really happen to, and how much is our bottom line? And it was based on that. It wasn't based on the good.
Right. And the tough thing about it is it became a notorious case and story because there had been a cost-benefit analysis done on how much it cost if we were going to fix this, and how much it would cost to pay families for deaths and severe burns and injuries. And this wasn't to come out, but it did come out and truly showed that business didn't have laws or regulations in there saying you need to be manufacturing safe products. And if you see something unsafe, you need to stop and put out a safe product. Instead,
they didn't care.
There was no one to arrest as a criminal action. Now, certainly there were huge civil actions, and the cost-benefit analysis turned out to be wrong because they found that document.
They did, but the company was allowed as this entity, this non-person entity. Like you said, there was nobody that they could actually hold the fire to their feet.
Okay. Well, let's look at the next quote. Very good. And in this quote, then, we see another point kind of coming to a close. Luke, would you read this for us?
Is this socialism?
Individual responsibility.
Individual responsibility. The difficulty of exercising social responsibility illustrates, of course, the great virtue of private competitive enterprise. It forces people to be responsible for their own actions and make it difficult for them to exploit other people for either selfish or unselfish purposes. They can do good, but only at their own expense.
Aaron, could you tell us a little bit about that quote that Luke just so graciously read for us?
Well, my first reaction is just, I think it's odd to use exploit people for unselfish purposes. It just seems so counterintuitive to me. But I think what Friedman's trying to point out here is that in referring to private competitive enterprise, he wants to make social responsibility a private enterprise as well.
Okay. I think that's a very fair statement. Anything you'd like to add to that, Brent?
I don't think so. Well, yes, one thing. Sometimes I have running through my mind the idea of unintended consequences. And when anyone tries to do something that we perceive as being socially responsible, often there are unintended consequences that are negative that we couldn't anticipate. And I think that goes back to the idea of saying that businessmen may not be experts in solving social ills.
One of those things that fits into no good deed goes unpunished.
That kind of, yes. Yeah.
Well, let's read the one last quote then, and would you read this for us, Lloyd?
Sure. The situation of the individual proprietor is somewhat different. If he acts to reduce the returns of his enterprise in order to exercise his social responsibility, he is spending his own money, not someone else's.
Okay, thanks. And just absolutely wraps up the points made by both Aaron and Dr. Eager then in telling us that if you want social responsibility, that's just fine, but spend your own money to do it. Spend the money of Gore-Tex, of the Gore family, not Gore-Tex, to do it. Any other thoughts on this? Well, as I've mentioned to you before, I like to wrap up each of our business ethics episodes with a case study. And so once again, we have a case that's been provided for us from Arthur Anderson. And actually, it was Brent Eager that was able to get these cases for us. And we always need to make sure that we give them permission for using them. So thanks to Arthur Anderson, and too bad they're not here to receive that thanks too. But we'll go ahead and look at this clip and respond to it.
This vignette takes place at a mid-sized public accounting firm that has a growing consulting practice. Lori Neal is an accountant who works in the firm's consulting group, assisting in the evaluation and marketing of their general ledger package. This is Lori's second job since college. Her first was in the accounting department of the Cullen Company, a public relations firm. Lori's supervisor, Joyce Fitzpatrick, has recently assigned Lori to an engagement for the Cullen Company. Knowing her background, the assignment seemed logical. As part of her assignment, Lori is evaluating the general ledger packages on the market, including their own. She will conclude her evaluation with a recommendation to the Cullen Company's chief financial officer.
I'm glad you think so, Dave.
Well, we're glad to have you in our corner.
Listen, the reason I'm calling is to check on our software review. How's your analysis coming?
Pretty good. It looks like there are a couple of contenders that can do the job for you. I'm working on it now.
Good. You know I have faith in you. And Lori, we realize that your software may be in contention. If that's what you think is best, there won't be a problem.
Thanks, Dave. As a matter of fact, our package is one of several that has most of the features and functions that your company is looking for. Unfortunately, as I told you last week, none of the packages on the market satisfies all of your requirements. I'm working on a recommendation now. I should be getting back to you sometime tomorrow.
Well, fine.
Okay, I'll talk to you later.
Hi, got a minute?
Sure.
Good. Oh, is that the Cullen account?
Yes, I was just talking to Dave.
Well, how's it going?
Well, there are surprisingly a large number of packages on the market.
Is ours one of them?
Yes.
Well, do you have some time to bring me up to date?
Sure.
Good.
Well, when I first started evaluating general ledger packages for the Cullen Company, I found there are 6 software packages on the market. Some of them are compatible with their hardware. Most of them have the basic features and functions that Cullen needs. The problem lies in that Cullen has some unique requirements that none of the packages accommodate. So, what I've done is I've pared the list down in terms of the company's ability to customize their package, service, long-term viability,
And?
I brought it down to 2 packages, ours and Techron's. Now, I'm working on a micro level, ranking them from 1 to 5 across the board.
And the bottom line?
When I totaled the categories, ours was a 32, Techron a 40.
Lori, we've been looking for an opportunity to improve our package's viability by adding on some additional features. This could be a perfect opportunity. In fact, the changes we make for this installation could provide our package with the competitive edge that we've been looking for. Now, I'm not asking you to do anything dishonest, but let's be fair about this. The difference between a 32 and a 40 could be a marginal thing. Well, anyone who's ever done any of these analyses can tell you that there is a certain amount of subjectivity involved here. Well, for example, nobody knows our package better than we do. Could you have been more critical in evaluating our weaknesses? And recognize that there's going to be a better chance for success because we know our own capabilities. Can you truly say that you know Techron's package that well? There's our support, and you know our staff. This isn't fluff. If you recommend Techron's package, you're going to have to deal with all the baggage that goes with it.
Joyce, you've made some good points. Don't think I haven't thought about some of the things you've said. I've been agonizing over this all week. And having worked with Dave only makes it tougher. I need to be fair to everybody.
I know that you're conscientious, and you know that I trust your judgment. But let me tell you something that Frank said during our last directors meeting. He wants us to push this software. He believes in it. Now, you've been straightforward with Dave. I think you should continue to do so. But how are we going to explain to our director that we've recommended someone else's package when there isn't a clear-cut reason? Think about it.
Sure, no problem.
That's really a powerful case, isn't it,
Yeah,
Brent?
yeah, it really is. As we looked at it here, and Aaron said, conflict of interest.
Yes,
And I love
yes.
that phrase because that's at the heart of so many personal, ethical dilemmas that we face, is conflict of interest.
And Brent, whenever we're helping students assess a case like this, we usually say, okay, what are the ethical concerns? And who are the stakeholders? Who all are affected by this? And then we move on into what could be some possible solutions. But first big ethical concern then is that we've got a big conflict of interest, and what would you say another one is?
Well, in this particular case, it's, I think, a personal pressure
Absolutely.
that the person feels within a company to perform in a certain way. She's caught between her buddy Dave. She wants to give him a professional, objective opinion on this thing, but she's being pressured from within her firm enormously. Her job may be at stake here.
Okay, thank you. And so, Lloyd, what's she going to do? We see Friedman. What would Friedman say she should do? Because he's going to tell you, obey the law and obey ethics. But you've got this director who's saying, there's nothing wrong with our product. We're down to 2. And what's 8 points? You know, that's your system.
I think, well, Friedman, I think, would it be difficult just from that case to give a hard answer. You'd have to say, well, you have to look at the overall profits. I mean, and from judging from the case study, it seems like, okay, well, to sell their own product would be best for the business. So I think he'd lean towards that way. But then you'd have to do an analysis of, okay, well, what are the long-term effects? You know, if we sell our product and it's not working, how will that affect our company in the long run and all that? So there's a lot of analysis has to go into that.
Very good, Lloyd.
Yeah. There's another thing here that I'm reluctant to mention, but I will. As a statistician, which I am, I don't like the idea of adding together points of differing pears and plums and apples and automobiles. That's what she did in her analysis. I think that's flawed.
And that if she doesn't want to pick, or if she needs to pick her own firm, she's probably going to have to start over with all of the companies again with a different evaluation system.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think there's basically a dishonesty, you know,
Oh,
at the bottom
yes.
line here that a lot of people want to skip over and not call a spade what a spade is.
And we can see what it is right here. You pick our company, especially since we're that close.
Yeah.
Well, it's been such a fun class period with you, Brent. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And I'll be joining you at 8 a.m. on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays to teach business ethics.
8 a.m. it is. If I'm not there, start without me.
Okay, that's a deal. And thanks to you students for joining us. Next time we're going to be doing Machiavelli from The Prince. So I look forward to having that discussion with you as well. And thanks again for this good discussion. Bye-bye.